When my son Marcus screamed, "Just die, I don't care," at me as I sat in my wheelchair recovering from surgery, something inside my heart broke that I thought could never heal. But what Marcus didn't realize was that throughout my 70 years of life, I had learned that sometimes the people who dismiss you as a burden are the very ones who depend on you most. And within just 1 month, the son who told me to die would discover exactly how much his life depended on the mother he had thrown away. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. And if this resonates with you, please subscribe, because what happened next will shock you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 70 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. The deepest pain came not from strangers or circumstances, but from the child I had sacrificed everything to raise, standing over my hospital bed and telling me the world would be better without me. For 45 years, I built a career as a senior forensic accountant for the state of California, specializing in uncovering financial fraud and helping law enforcement agencies trace complex money laundering schemes. My work wasn't the glamorous detective stories you see in movies, no dramatic courtroom confrontations or high-speed chases, but it required something far more valuable: the analytical mind to see patterns others missed and the patience to follow money trails through years of carefully constructed deception. Margaret doesn't just find the numbers. My supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, used to tell new investigators during training sessions at our Sacramento headquarters, she finds the story the numbers are trying to hide. That's why we've recovered over $200 million in stolen assets during her tenure. She sees connections that would take most people months to discover, sometimes connections that span decades. This reputation for detecting hidden patterns and understanding how people moved money to conceal their criminal activities had made me indispensable to law enforcement agencies throughout California and Nevada. I worked on cases involving embezzlement schemes that had operated undetected for years, helped track down assets hidden during contentious divorces where one spouse was trying to cheat the other out of their rightful share, and consulted on complex tax evasion cases where wealthy individuals had created elaborate offshore structures to avoid paying their fair share to society. My expertise extended far beyond simple number crunching. I understood shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, real estate transfers designed to hide ownership, and the intricate web of financial instruments that sophisticated criminals use to make stolen money appear legitimate. I could read financial statements like others read novels, spotting inconsistencies and anomalies that revealed the true story hidden beneath layers of falsified documentation. You have a gift for seeing what people are really doing with their money, my colleague Robert Kim used to say during our monthly case review meetings. Most people look at financial records and see transactions. You look at the same records and see motivations, see the human story behind every transfer and every hidden account. But more importantly for my personal life, this expertise had taught me that real financial security isn't about how much money you earn. It's about understanding how money works and making strategic decisions that compound over time. Throughout my career, I lived far below my means, invested systematically in low-risk, high-quality assets, and built wealth slowly but steadily through careful planning rather than flashy spending or high-risk speculation that could evaporate overnight. While my colleagues drove luxury cars and lived in expensive apartments, I drove a reliable Honda Civic for 12 years and lived in a modest but comfortable house in the San Gabriel Valley that I purchased for $85,000 in 1985. A house that would eventually become the foundation of everything that followed in my story. My late husband David had been a high school mathematics teacher with an extraordinary gift for connecting with students whom other educators had given up on as hopeless cases. He taught at Roosevelt High School in East Los Angeles for 38 years, working primarily with kids from low-income families who often came to school hungry, stressed about family problems, and convinced that education was irrelevant to their futures. Every student has potential. David used to say as he spent his own money on supplies for kids who couldn't afford graphing calculators or geometry sets. The difference between success and failure isn't intelligence or natural talent. It's having someone who believes in you and teaches you that consistent effort over time creates opportunities that seem impossible when you're starting out. David's classroom wasn't just about mathematics. It was about teaching life skills, problem-solving strategies, and the kind of patient persistence that transforms small daily efforts into significant long-term achievements. He helped hundreds of students not just pass algebra or calculus, but develop the analytical thinking skills that would serve them throughout their careers and personal lives. Together, David and I created a home where financial responsibility, intellectual curiosity, and genuine care for others were equally valued. Our house on Sycamore Street wasn't the largest in the neighborhood, but it was completely paid off by the time I turned 42, and we had used our combined incomes to build an investment portfolio that grew steadily year after year without requiring us to take dangerous risks or sacrifice our daily quality of life. Money is a tool for creating choices, not a scorecard for measuring worth, David used to say as we reviewed our monthly budget and investment statements together every Sunday evening. The goal isn't to have more money than other people. The goal is to have enough security that we can make decisions based on our values rather than our fears, and enough resources that we can help others when they face genuine crises. This philosophy guided every financial decision we made throughout our marriage. We drove used cars that we maintained carefully, rather than leasing new vehicles with impressive monthly payments. We took modest vacations focused on experiences and learning, rather than expensive resorts designed to display wealth. We invested in education, both formal degrees and continuous learning, rather than material possessions that would depreciate over time. Most importantly, we saved and invested consistently, putting away 25% of our combined income every month, regardless of what unexpected expenses or attractive purchases presented themselves. This discipline, maintained over decades, created a foundation of financial security that would prove far more robust than either of us had initially imagined. David passed away 6 years ago from complications related to diabetes that he had managed carefully for over 15 years. Despite following his doctor's recommendations, maintaining his medication schedule, and adapting his diet to control his blood sugar, the disease gradually damaged his kidneys and cardiovascular system until his body could no longer sustain the fight. The grief was overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated, even though we had known for years that his condition was progressive and would eventually shorten his life. Losing David wasn't just losing my husband. It was losing my partner in every major decision, my companion for every evening walk around our neighborhood, my collaborator in the vegetable garden we had tended together since our 30s, and my closest friend for discussions about everything from current events to family concerns to our dreams for retirement. The house we had filled with conversation and shared projects suddenly felt impossibly quiet. The financial planning sessions, that had been collaborative discussions between equal partners, became solitary reviews of statements and projections. The evening routine of preparing dinner together while sharing stories from our respective workdays became a lonely process of cooking simple meals while the silence stretched endlessly around me. During those first months of widowhood, I struggled with depression that made even routine tasks feel overwhelming. Getting out of bed required conscious effort. Maintaining the garden David and I had designed together seemed pointless when there was no one to share the satisfaction of watching tomatoes ripen or roses bloom. The financial security we had built together felt hollow when there was no one to discuss future plans or share the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're prepared for whatever challenges might emerge. Our son Marcus had been born when David and I were both 28 years old, after 3 years of trying to conceive and beginning to wonder whether parenthood would be part of our story. His arrival transformed our lives in ways we had hoped for, but couldn't have fully imagined. Not just the practical changes of sleepless nights and constant responsibility, but the profound emotional shift that comes from loving someone more. than your own survival. From his earliest years, Marcus was bright, curious, and showed exceptional aptitude for mathematics and logical reasoning. He could solve complex puzzles that frustrated adults, understand mathematical concepts that were supposedly beyond his grade level, and demonstrate the kind of analytical thinking that suggested he had inherited the best qualities from both David's teaching abilities and my investigative skills. We encouraged his intellectual development while also working to instill the values that had guided our own lives: the importance of treating others with respect regardless of their background or circumstances, the difference between wanting something and needing it, and the understanding that true security comes from building something sustainable rather than seeking quick profits or impressive appearances. "You have advantages that many children don't have," I used to tell Marcus when he complained about our family's modest lifestyle compared to some of his classmates who had the latest video games, designer clothes, or expensive sports equipment. "Those advantages create responsibility, not entitlement. We're building something that will last and can weather difficulties, not just something that looks impressive today, but might disappear if circumstances change." Marcus seemed to understand and appreciate these lessons throughout his childhood and teenage years. He excelled academically while also participating in volunteer activities at David's school, helping younger students with homework and seeing firsthand how his father's patient teaching approach could transform struggling students into confident learners. He earned a partial academic scholarship to UC Berkeley, where he studied computer science and developed expertise in software development, digital systems management, and the kind of technological problem-solving that was becoming increasingly valuable in the rapidly evolving economy of the 1990s and early 2000s. After graduation, Marcus found work with a small tech startup in Silicon Valley that specialized in developing security software for financial institutions. His combination of analytical skills, attention to detail, and understanding of how systems could be manipulated, perhaps inherited from my forensic accounting background, made him exceptionally effective at designing software that could detect and prevent various forms of digital fraud. As the company grew from 12 employees to over 200, Marcus advanced from junior programmer to senior developer to chief technology officer, earning a salary that exceeded what David and I had made collectively during the peak years of our careers. His success was impressive and well-deserved. Marcus had genuine talent for understanding complex technological systems and translating abstract concepts into practical business solutions that solved real problems for their clients. But somewhere, during his rise through the competitive environment of Silicon Valley tech culture, the values David and I had tried to instill in him became overshadowed by a different set of priorities that emphasized maximum wealth accumulation, aggressive risk-taking, and the kind of lifestyle inflation that turns high income into chronic financial pressure. "You and Dad were too conservative with money," Marcus began telling me during our conversations after David's death, when I was still processing grief and trying to figure out how to structure my life as a widow. "You could have made so much more if you had invested in growth stocks instead of boring index funds, if you had leveraged your home equity for additional investments, if you had taken bigger risks when you were younger and had time to recover from potential losses." This criticism of the financial strategies that had provided our family with security, stability, and peace of mind throughout 4 decades troubled me deeply. Not because I doubted our choices, but because it revealed how completely Marcus had absorbed a mindset that measured success purely in terms of maximum monetary accumulation, rather than long-term security and quality of life. "Marcus," I tried to explain during one particularly difficult conversation, "your father and I chose strategies that let us sleep peacefully at night, that protected us during economic downturns like 2008, and that gave us the freedom to make decisions based on our values rather than financial pressure. We built something sustainable that could support us through retirement and health challenges, and that could provide security for you if you ever faced genuine emergencies." But Marcus seemed unable to appreciate the difference between financial security and financial optimization, between having enough and having the maximum possible amount. The tech industry culture that had shaped his professional success had also shaped his personal values in ways that made our family's approach to money seem timid and wasteful, rather than wise and sustainable. When Marcus married Jennifer Walsh 4 years ago, I was hopeful that marriage might help him rediscover the balance between professional achievement and personal relationships that had always characterized our family's approach to life. Jennifer worked in marketing for a luxury lifestyle brand that specialized in high-end home goods and fashion accessories, and she was undeniably intelligent, articulate, and initially seemed to appreciate the close relationship Marcus and I had maintained despite our different perspectives on money and success. "Your son talks about you constantly," Jennifer told me during one of our first extended conversations at their engagement party. "He's so proud of your career accomplishments and everything you achieved in forensic accounting. It's refreshing to meet a man who's comfortable acknowledging his mother's professional success and intellectual capabilities." Jennifer's own background was impressive. She had earned an MBA from Stanford and had worked her way up through increasingly responsible positions in marketing and brand management. She understood consumer psychology, digital marketing strategies, and the sophisticated approaches that luxury brands used to create desire for products that cost far more than their functional value would justify. For the first 18 months of their marriage, our family relationships seemed to be finding a healthy new equilibrium that honored both my desire to remain close to my son and their need to establish their independence as a couple. Marcus and Jennifer visited regularly, included me in their holiday celebrations, and seemed genuinely interested in maintaining the kind of integrated family life that David and I had always valued. But everything began to change after they purchased their house in Palo Alto, a stunning modern property that cost $2.8 million and represented everything that was both impressive and financially dangerous about their approach to building a life together. The house was undeniably beautiful, with clean architectural lines, premium finishes throughout, a gourmet kitchen that looked like something from a magazine, and smart home technology that controlled everything from lighting to temperature to security systems through smartphone apps. It sat on a quarter-acre lot in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Silicon Valley, surrounded by other expensive homes owned by tech executives, venture capitalists, and successful entrepreneurs. But the financial structure behind this impressive purchase was deeply troubling to someone with my background in analyzing how people got themselves into impossible financial situations. Marcus and Jennifer had put down only 10%, $280,000, and were carrying a mortgage payment that consumed nearly 65% of their combined income, even with Marcus's substantial salary and Jennifer's successful marketing career. "We're investing in our future," Marcus explained when I gently questioned whether such an expensive house was financially wise for a couple in their early 30s. "Property values in this area only go up over time, and we can refinance or leverage the equity as our incomes continue to grow. You have to spend money to make money, and this house is going to be the foundation for everything else we build together." This logic, borrowed directly from the speculative thinking that had caused so many of the financial disasters I had investigated during my career, worried me deeply. Marcus and Jennifer were betting their entire financial stability on continued appreciation in one of the most volatile and overvalued real estate markets in the country, while carrying debt levels that left them vulnerable to any interruption in their income or any significant change in their personal circumstances. More troubling was how this financial pressure seemed to be affecting Marcus's personality and his approach to family relationships. The thoughtful, empathetic young man David and I had raised began making comments that suggested he was developing a sense of entitlement about money that had never been part of our family's values. "Mom, you're sitting on all this wealth while Jennifer and I are struggling with mortgage payments and trying to plan for our future," he said during one particularly uncomfortable conversation at their new house, as we sat in their designer living room surrounded by furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. "You could help us with the down payment for a refinance that would reduce our monthly costs, or you could co-sign for a home equity line that would give us access to capital for investments. That's what family does. They support each other when someone is working to build something significant. This request, framed as family obligation rather than financial assistance, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both my financial situation and the principles David and I had tried to teach him throughout his childhood and young adulthood. While I was indeed financially secure, my wealth wasn't liquid cash sitting in checking accounts waiting to be distributed to family members who wanted to fund lifestyle choices I considered unwise. My financial security was built on carefully invested retirement accounts, conservative index funds that had grown steadily over decades, and the paid-off house that provided my housing stability without ongoing mortgage payments. More importantly, Marcus and Jennifer's financial pressure wasn't the result of bad luck or circumstances beyond their control. It was the direct consequence of choosing to live far beyond their means in pursuit of a lifestyle that looked successful, rather than one that was actually sustainable. The breaking point in our relationship came 2 months ago when I suffered a fall at home that resulted in a broken hip requiring surgery and several weeks of recovery. At 70 years old, this kind of injury is serious but entirely manageable with proper medical care, physical therapy, and the kind of patience that allows healing to occur naturally. I was fortunate to have excellent health insurance through my state pension system, sufficient savings to cover additional expenses not covered by insurance, and a comprehensive recovery plan developed by my orthopedic surgeon that would have me back to normal activities within 3 to 4 months. But Marcus and Jennifer's response to my injury revealed the true nature of what our relationship had become, and showed me exactly how far their sense of entitlement had developed beyond anything David and I had ever imagined possible. Instead of focusing on my recovery and well-being, instead of offering practical support during my rehabilitation, they immediately began discussions about how my temporary mobility limitations demonstrated that I could no longer live independently and needed to make immediate, permanent changes to my living situation that would coincidentally provide them with access to my financial resources. And that's when my son looked at me in my hospital bed, recovering from surgery, and told me to just die, because I wouldn't. Surrender control of my life and assets to make his life more convenient. But what Marcus didn't understand as he stormed out of my hospital room, leaving me alone with his cruel words echoing in the silence, was that his explosive outburst had just activated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made me successful in forensic accounting for 45 years. The son who told me to die had no idea that his mother had spent a lifetime learning how to trace deception, uncover hidden motivations, and build airtight cases against people who thought they could manipulate systems for their personal advantage. And within just 1 month, Marcus would discover that the woman he had dismissed as a dying burden actually held the keys to everything he thought he wanted, and the power to give him exactly what he had asked for. The silence in my hospital room after Marcus stormed out was deafening, broken only by the steady beeping of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of nurses making their rounds. For the first time in my 70 years, I had heard my own child, the baby I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had helped with homework, the young man I had celebrated at graduation, tell me he wished I would die. But as I lay there in the aftermath of his cruel words, something unexpected happened. Instead of falling deeper into despair, I felt a familiar sensation that I hadn't experienced since retiring from forensic accounting 3 years ago. The cold, analytical clarity that had made me one of California's most successful financial investigators. Marcus had made a critical mistake. In his rage and frustration, he had revealed information that activated every professional instinct I had developed during 4 decades of tracking financial fraud and manipulation. His desperate demands for access to my assets, combined with Jennifer's calculated pressure campaign and their obviously unsustainable financial situation, created a pattern I recognized immediately. They weren't just entitled adult children asking for help. They were operating a systematic campaign to gain control of my resources, and they were making the same mistakes that financial predators always made when they thought their target was too vulnerable or trusting to fight back. The cow. Next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. Dr. Patricia Martinelli, please, I said to the receptionist at Golden State Investigations, a private firm I had worked with extensively during my career. Tell her it's Margaret Chen calling about a family matter that requires immediate attention. Patricia had been one of the most skilled private investigators in California for over 20 years, specializing in financial fraud cases, elder abuse investigations, and the kind of complex family situations where money brought out the worst in people's character. We had collaborated on dozens of cases during my career, and she understood how to build airtight documentation that would hold up under legal scrutiny. Margaret, I heard you retired, Patricia said when she came on the line. What's going on? That's bringing you back into investigation mode? It's personal this time, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of what I was about to reveal. I need a comprehensive investigation into my son and daughter-in-law's financial situation, their recent behavior toward me, and any evidence of systematic manipulation or potential elder abuse. I believe they're planning to gain control of my assets through coercion, and I need professional documentation of their activities. Patricia's tone shifted immediately to the focused professionalism I remembered from our working relationship. Margaret, that's a serious allegation. What's prompted this concern? I spent the next 30 minutes detailing everything that had transpired over the past year. The escalating pressure to sell my house, the coordinated campaign around my injury, the fabricated urgency about assisted living, and finally Marcus's explosive outburst in my hospital room. As I spoke, I could hear Patricia taking notes, asking the kind of specific questions that would help her build a comprehensive case file. How much do you know about their actual financial situation? She asked. Income, expenses, debt levels, spending patterns? That's what I need you to find out, I replied. Marcus has been claiming financial hardship, but I want to understand the real numbers. Are they genuinely struggling, or are they living beyond their means and looking for someone else to subsidize their lifestyle choices? I'll need access to your financial records as well, Patricia explained, to establish baseline documentation of your assets and competency in managing your affairs. If this escalates to legal proceedings, we'll need to demonstrate clearly that you're financially sophisticated and fully capable of making your own decisions. Of course, I agreed. Patricia, I need you to understand something important. This isn't about revenge or punishment. If Marcus and Jennifer are genuinely in financial trouble through no fault of their own, I want to help them appropriately. But if they're trying to manipulate and pressure me into subsidizing irresponsible choices, I need that documented comprehensively. 3 days later, Patricia arrived at my hospital room with a briefcase full of initial findings that were both shocking and sadly predictable. Her investigation had uncovered financial records that told a story of reckless spending, dangerous debt levels, and the kind of lifestyle inflation that had destroyed many families I had encountered during my career. Margaret, this is worse than typical overspending, Patricia began, spreading documents across my bedside table. Marcus and Jennifer's monthly expenses exceed their combined income by approximately $8,000 per month. They're not just living beyond their means. They're in a financial death spiral that's accelerating every month. The documentation was comprehensive and damning. Marcus and Jennifer's $2.8 million house came with a monthly mortgage payment of $1,400, but that was only the beginning of their housing costs. Property taxes added another $2,800 monthly, homeowners insurance was $850, and homeowners association fees for their exclusive neighborhood added another $600. So their housing costs alone are over $18,150 per month, I calculated quickly. What's their combined income? Marcus earns $285,000 annually, and Jennifer earns $95,000. Patricia replied. Their gross monthly income is approximately $31,600, but after taxes, they're taking home about $22,400. Housing is consuming 84% of their net income, which is financially catastrophic by any reasonable standard. But housing was only part of their financial disaster. Patricia's investigation had uncovered credit card debt exceeding $145,000 across 12 different accounts, car payments totaling $2,200 monthly for 2 luxury vehicles, and monthly expenses for clothing, dining, entertainment, and travel that averaged another $4,500. They're using credit cards to cover basic living expenses, Patricia continued, pointing to detailed spending analysis she had compiled. Groceries, utilities, gasoline, essentials that should be covered by income are being charged to credit cards that they're paying minimum amounts on each month. The interest payments alone on their accumulated debt were consuming over $3,200 monthly, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly as their available credit decreased and interest rates increased on their variable rate accounts. How long can they sustain this pattern? I asked, though my forensic accounting background already suggested the answer. Based on their current trajectory, they'll hit maximum credit limits within 8 to 10 months, Patricia replied. At that point, they'll face immediate financial collapse unless they can access significant additional resources or dramatically reduce their expenses. This timeline explained everything about Marcus and Jennifer's recent behavior. Their escalating pressure for me to sell my house, their manufactured urgency around my injury, and their increasingly desperate demands for financial assistance weren't driven by concern for my welfare. They were driven by their approaching financial catastrophe and their need to access my assets before their situation became completely unmanageable. There's more, Patricia continued, producing another set of documents. I found records of discussions with several elder law attorneys over the past 6 months. Jennifer has been researching guardianship procedures, power of attorney requirements, and the legal processes for having elderly family members declared incompetent. The documentation showed a pattern of systematic research into how adult children could gain legal control over elderly parents' finances, including consultations about what medical conditions might support competency challenges and what documentation would be required to override an elderly person's autonomous decision-making. They've been planning this for months, I realized, the pieces falling into place with the same clarity I had experienced when solving complex fraud cases during my career. The pressure about my house, the concerns about my safety, the immediate response to my injury, none of it was spontaneous family concern. It was a calculated campaign to create justification for taking control of my assets. Patricia nodded grimly. There's also evidence of financial planning based on assumptions about inheriting your estate. I found documents showing they've been discussing how to use your house as collateral for additional borrowing, and they've made preliminary inquiries about reverse mortgage products that would allow them to access equity while you're still living there. This revelation was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire investigation. Marcus and Jennifer weren't just planning to pressure me into selling my house. They were planning to use my property as security for their own additional borrowing, effectively gambling my housing stability against their continued ability to maintain their unsustainable lifestyle. Margaret, there's one more thing you need to know, Patricia said, her voice taking on the careful tone she used when delivering the most serious findings. I found evidence that they've been discussing the timeline of your likely death and how that would affect their financial planning. She produced copies of email exchanges between Marcus and Jennifer that discussed my health, my life expectancy, and their financial projections based on different scenarios for when they might inherit my assets. The clinical, calculating nature of these discussions, my own son speculating about my death as a solution to his financial problems, was more painful than anything he had said to my face. They've calculated that inheriting your estate would solve their immediate financial crisis and provide enough capital to restructure their debt, Patricia explained. Your house alone would generate enough equity to pay off their credit cards and provide a substantial down payment for investment properties they want to purchase. But Patricia's most significant finding was something that would prove crucial in everything that followed. Her investigation had uncovered evidence that Marcus and Jennifer had been misrepresenting my financial situation and mental state to justify their planned intervention. They've been telling people that you're experiencing cognitive decline, that you're making irrational financial decisions, and that you're at risk of being exploited by scammers or unethical financial advisors, Patricia reported. Jennifer has been particularly active in creating a narrative that your resistance to their suggestions proves you're not thinking clearly. The documentation included recorded conversations where Jennifer described me as increasingly confused and stubborn, where Marcus claimed I was making dangerous financial decisions that could jeopardize the family's security, and where both of them discussed the need to take action before Mom's condition deteriorates further. This systematic campaign to undermine my reputation and credibility was designed to create social and legal justification for overriding my autonomous decision-making. If they could convince family friends, medical professionals, or legal authorities that I was experiencing cognitive decline, they could potentially pursue guardianship proceedings that would give them control over my assets while portraying themselves as responsible adult children protecting a vulnerable elderly parent. Patricia, I need you to document my actual mental and physical condition comprehensively, I told her. If they're claiming I'm incompetent, I want professional evidence that proves otherwise. Over the following week, Patricia arranged for comprehensive evaluations by a geriatric psychiatrist, a neuropsychologist, and a financial competency specialist who worked regularly with elder law cases. The results were exactly what I expected, but crucial for establishing my legal position. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the geriatric psychiatrist, concluded that I demonstrated cognitive function entirely consistent with a woman 30 years younger, with no signs of dementia, depression, or any other condition that would impair judgment or decision-making capacity. The neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Michael Rodriguez found that my memory, analytical reasoning, and problem-solving abilities were significantly above average for any age group, with particular strengths in financial reasoning and complex decision-making that reflect decades of professional expertise. Most importantly, the financial competency evaluation conducted by Dr. Sarah Kim, a specialist who testified regularly in elder abuse cases, concluded that I was exceptionally qualified to manage complex financial affairs with sophisticated understanding of investment principles, risk assessment, and long-term financial planning that exceeds the capabilities of most financial professionals. These professional evaluations not only disproved Marcus and Jennifer's claims about my mental state, but established that I was more financially competent than the vast majority of people in any age group. Their claims that I needed protection from my own poor judgment were not just false, they were the opposite of reality. But Patricia's investigation had uncovered something else that would prove even more significant. Evidence of Marcus and Jennifer's complete misunderstanding of my actual financial situation. Margaret, they have no idea how much money you actually have, Patricia informed me during one of our planning sessions. Their financial projections are based on assumptions about your house value and basic retirement savings, but they don't know about your investment portfolio or the full scope of your assets. This was crucial information. Marcus and Jennifer's entire campaign was based on their belief that gaining control of my house and retirement accounts would solve their financial problems. They had no idea that their assumptions about my wealth were dramatically understated, or that the woman they were trying to manipulate had resources they couldn't even imagine. How much do they think I'm worth? I asked. Based on their planning documents, they estimate your total assets at approximately $800,000 to $1.2 million, Patricia replied. They seem to think your wealth consists primarily of home equity plus standard retirement savings for a government employee. I almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Marcus and Jennifer were orchestrating an elaborate manipulation campaign to access what they thought was a modest retirement nest egg, having no idea that their target was actually worth significantly more than they could comprehend. During my 45 years as a forensic accountant, living below my means and investing systematically in carefully selected assets, I had built a portfolio that now exceeded $4.8 million in value. My house, purchased for $85,000 in 1985, was now worth approximately $1.6 million in California's inflated real estate market. But that was only the beginning of my actual financial position. I owned rental properties in 3 different cities, purchased strategically over the years when market conditions created opportunities to buy quality real estate below fair value. I had invested consistently in low-cost index funds that had compounded over decades into a substantial portfolio. Most significantly, I had used my expertise in detecting financial fraud to identify and invest in companies with exceptionally strong governance and transparent accounting practices. Investments that had generated returns far exceeding market averages. Marcus and Jennifer thought they were targeting a vulnerable elderly woman with modest assets. In reality, they were attempting to defraud one of California's most financially sophisticated retirees, someone with both the resources and expertise to defend herself comprehensively. "Patricia, I want you to prepare for Phase 2 of your investigation," I told her as we reviewed the comprehensive documentation she had compiled. "I want to know everything about their financial situation, their plans, and their activities over the past 6 months. If this escalates to legal proceedings, I want documentation that will make their behavior absolutely clear to any judge or jury. But more importantly, I wanted to understand exactly what Marcus and Jennifer were planning next. Their approaching financial collapse meant they would become increasingly desperate, and desperate people made increasingly dangerous decisions. There's something else you should know," Patricia said, producing one final set of documents. "I found evidence that they're planning to escalate their campaign significantly if you continue to resist their suggestions." The documentation showed that Marcus and Jennifer had researched emergency conservatorship procedures, which would allow them to gain immediate control over my finances if they could convince a judge that I was in immediate danger due to my own incompetence or the actions of others who might be manipulating me. "They're planning to claim that you're being influenced by unethical financial advisors or potential scammers," Patricia explained. "The strategy is to portray your resistance to their suggestions as evidence that someone else is manipulating you for their own benefit. This approach would allow them to position themselves as heroes protecting me from exploitation, while simultaneously gaining access to the assets they needed to solve their own financial crisis. It was sophisticated, potentially effective, and completely fraudulent, exactly the kind of elder abuse scheme I had helped prosecute during my career." "How long do we have before they implement this plan?" I asked. "Based on their financial timeline and the research they've been conducting, I estimate they'll move within the next 2 to 3 weeks, Patricia replied. "Their credit situation is deteriorating rapidly, and they can't wait much longer without facing immediate financial collapse." That night, alone in my hospital room with Patricia's comprehensive investigation spread across my bedside table, I made the decision that would determine how this family crisis would be resolved. Marcus and Jennifer thought they were manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman who had no choice but to submit to their demands or face isolation and potential legal challenges to her competency. They had no idea they were actually targeting someone with the professional expertise, financial resources, and strategic knowledge to not only defend herself, but to turn their own tactics against them in ways they would never see coming. The cow. Son who had told me to die, the daughter-in-law who had researched how to have me declared incompetent, the couple who had planned to steal my assets to fund their irresponsible lifestyle. They were about to discover that their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my resources. Their biggest mistake was underestimating me. And within just 2 weeks, Marcus would learn exactly what happened when a forensic accountant with 4 decades of experience turned her professional skills toward protecting herself from the people who thought they could manipulate her into giving up everything she had, worked her entire life to build. The investigation was complete. Now it was time for the counterattack. 2 weeks after Patricia completed her investigation, I was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health and a comprehensive rehabilitation plan that would have me back to full mobility within 6 weeks. But more importantly, I was released with something Marcus and Jennifer could never have anticipated: a complete understanding of their financial situation, their manipulation tactics, and their planned timeline for gaining control of my assets. 30. First phase of my response began the moment I arrived home to my house on Sycamore Street. After 45 years of investigating financial fraud, I knew that the most effective counterattack always began with documentation that was so comprehensive and professionally prepared that it left no room for dispute or alternative interpretation. My first call was to James Morrison, senior partner at Margaret Chen and Associates, the law firm that had handled my estate planning for over 15 years. James specialized in elder law, financial fraud cases, and the kind of complex family situations where money had corrupted relationships beyond repair. Margaret, Patricia Martinelli briefed me on her investigation, James said when I reached him that afternoon. What we're looking at appears to be a textbook case of attempted financial elder abuse, complicated by the fact that the perpetrators are your immediate family members. How do you want to proceed? I want to be protected legally, but I also want them to have the opportunity to step back from this destructive path before it destroys our family permanently, I replied. Can we structure a response that gives them a clear choice between accepting responsibility and facing the full legal consequences of their actions? James understood immediately. We can prepare comprehensive documentation of their fraudulent activities and attempted manipulation, but present it initially as a family intervention rather than a criminal complaint. If they choose to escalate rather than accept accountability, we'll be prepared to pursue every available legal remedy. Over the following week, James worked with Patricia to prepare what he called a comprehensive family disclosure package, a professionally bound presentation that laid out every aspect of Marcus and Jennifer's financial situation, their systematic campaign to gain control of my assets, and the evidence of their planned escalation if I continued to resist their demands. The documentation was devastating in its thoroughness. Every conversation they had recorded without my consent, every consultation with elder law attorneys about guardianship procedures, every financial projection based on assumptions about my death, every misrepresentation of my mental state to justify their intervention. All of it was documented with the kind of professional precision that made dispute impossible. But the centerpiece of the presentation was something that would completely transform their understanding of the situation they had created: a comprehensive financial disclosure that revealed the true scope of my assets and the implications of their attempted manipulation. Margaret, before we proceed with confronting them, I need to ask you something important, James said during our final preparation meeting. Are you prepared for this disclosure to permanently change your relationship with your son? Once Marcus and Jennifer understand what they were actually attempting to steal, and once they realize how completely you've documented their fraudulent behavior, there may be no path back to a normal family relationship. I had been thinking about this question for days, weighing my love for the son I had raised against the reality of what he had become and the magnitude of what he had attempted to do to me. James, the son I loved would never have told his mother to die because she wouldn't surrender her assets to subsidize his irresponsible spending, I replied. The relationship I thought we had was already destroyed when Marcus made the decision to treat me as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a mother to be respected. What I'm doing now is simply revealing the truth about what our relationship had already become. 3 days later, I was ready to implement the most important confrontation of my life. I called Marcus and requested a meeting at my house, telling him that I had been thinking about our conversation at the hospital and wanted to discuss some important family matters. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about this situation, Mom, Marcus said, his tone carrying the patronizing confidence of someone who believed he had successfully pressured a vulnerable elderly woman into submission. Jennifer and I, have been researching some excellent assisted living communities that would provide the medical support and social activities you need. We can discuss all of that when you get here, I replied, giving no indication of what he was actually walking into. Can you and Jennifer come by tomorrow evening around 7? When Marcus and Jennifer arrived at my house the following evening, they carried briefcases full of materials they had prepared for what they clearly expected to be my surrender to their demands. Jennifer had printed brochures from assisted living facilities. Marcus had prepared financial projections showing how selling my house would benefit the entire family, and both of them carried the confident demeanor of people who believed they had successfully manipulated a difficult situation to their advantage. Mom, we're so relieved that you've come to understand why these changes are necessary, Jennifer began, settling into my living room with the comfortable assurance of someone who thought the hard work was over. The communities we've selected are really beautiful, and the financial arrangements we've structured will provide security for everyone involved. Before we discuss any of that, I want to share some information that I think will help you understand the current situation more clearly, I replied, placing Patricia's investigation report on the coffee table between us. The transformation in their expressions as they realized what they were looking at was immediate and unmistakable. The confident smiles disappeared, replaced by the kind of wary tension that indicated they understood they were no longer controlling the conversation. "What is this?" Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected what kind of documentation he was seeing. "This is a comprehensive investigation into your financial situation, your recent activities regarding my assets, and your plans for gaining control of my estate," I replied calmly. "I think you'll find it very thorough and entirely accurate." For the next hour, I walked Marcus and Jennifer through every aspect of Patricia's investigation, watching their confidence transform into shock, then fear, then desperate anger as they realized how completely their manipulation campaign had been exposed and documented. The financial analysis was particularly devastating. Seeing their spending patterns, debt levels, and approaching financial collapse laid out in professional charts and graphs forced them to confront the reality of how unsustainable their lifestyle had become, and how their pressure on me was directly connected to their own irresponsible financial decisions. "You had us investigated like we're criminals?" Jennifer said, her voice rising with indignation that barely concealed her fear. "We're your family, trying to help you make decisions that are in everyone's best interest." "You researched guardianship procedures to have me declared incompetent," I replied, pointing to the documentation of their consultations with elder law attorneys. "You recorded our conversations without my consent, misrepresented my mental state, to create justification for overriding my decisions, and made financial plans based on assumptions about my death. Those aren't the actions of family members. Those are the actions of people planning to commit financial fraud." Marcus's response revealed the depth of his sense of entitlement and his complete inability to recognize the magnitude of what he had attempted. "We weren't trying to defraud you, Mom. We were trying to help you understand that your attachment to this house is preventing the family from making optimal financial decisions," he said, his voice taking on the aggressive tone I recognized from our hospital confrontation. "You're being selfish and short-sighted, and we were researching legal options to protect you from your own poor judgment." This inability to accept responsibility, even when confronted with comprehensive evidence of their systematic manipulation, confirmed that James had been right about the likely trajectory of this confrontation. Marcus and Jennifer weren't going to acknowledge wrongdoing or step back from their destructive path. They were going to escalate. "There's something else you need to understand," I continued, producing the second component of our presentation. The comprehensive financial disclosure that would reveal the true scope of their miscalculation. "Your entire campaign has been based on assumptions about my financial situation that are dramatically incorrect," I began, opening the portfolio that contained detailed documentation of my actual assets. "You've been trying to manipulate someone you thought was a vulnerable elderly woman with modest retirement savings. You need to understand who you were actually targeting." What followed was the most satisfying moment of revelation in my 70 years of life. As I walked Marcus and Jennifer through the true scope of my financial position, the $4.8 million portfolio, the multiple rental properties, the sophisticated investment strategies that had generated wealth far beyond their comprehension, I watched their expressions transform from shock to disbelief, to the kind of devastated recognition that comes from realizing you've made an irreversible strategic error. "You're worth almost $5 million, Marcus whispered, his voice hollow as he stared at professional asset valuations that confirmed everything I was telling them. "All this time, you've been sitting on this much wealth while Jennifer and I were struggling with mortgage payments? I've been living comfortably within my means while you've been living irresponsibly beyond yours," I corrected. "The difference isn't how much money we have. The difference is how we've chosen to manage what we have." Jennifer's response was perhaps more revealing than Marcus's shock. Instead of embarrassment at being caught attempting to defraud someone, instead of recognition of how their actions had damaged our family relationships, she immediately shifted to calculation about how this new information changed their strategic position. "If you have this much money, then helping us with our mortgage situation wouldn't even make a dent in your overall wealth," she said, her tone taking on the kind of aggressive negotiation style I imagined she used in her marketing career. "You could solve our immediate financial problems without affecting your own security at all." This response, treating the revelation of their attempted fraud as a new opportunity for financial extraction, confirmed everything I needed to know about whether Marcus and Jennifer were capable of stepping back from their destructive path. "Jennifer, you just spent an hour learning that I had you professionally investigated because of your systematic attempts to manipulate and defraud me," I replied. "Your response to that revelation is to immediately begin calculating how you can extract money from me more effectively. Do you understand how that response confirms every concern I have about your motivations and character?" But Marcus's reaction was even more telling. Instead of shame or apology for the pain his cruel words had caused, instead of recognition that he had told his mother to die for financial convenience, he shifted immediately to anger that I had exposed his manipulation rather than submitted to it. "You set us up," he said, his voice taking on the same bitter edge I had heard in the hospital. "You let us think you were vulnerable and struggling when you were actually wealthy enough to help us but chose not to. You manipulated this entire situation to make us look bad." This complete reversal of reality, portraying their systematic campaign to defraud me as evidence that I had manipulated them, demonstrated a level of psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple financial pressure. "Marcus, I never misrepresented my financial situation," I replied calmly. "I simply didn't volunteer information that you planned to use to pressure me into subsidizing your irresponsible spending. The fact that you feel deceived by learning I have resources you can't access reveals everything about your actual motivations." What followed was the most painful conversation of my life, as my son and daughter-in-law revealed the full extent of their sense of entitlement and their complete inability to accept responsibility for their own financial situation or their manipulative behavior toward me. "We're your family," Jennifer insisted, her voice taking on a wheedling tone that was somehow more offensive than outright aggression. "Family members are supposed to help each other during difficult times. If you have the resources to solve our problems easily, refusing to help is just cruel selfishness." "You're not asking for help during a difficult time," I replied. "You're demanding that I subsidize lifestyle choices that have created an ongoing financial crisis. There's a fundamental difference between helping family members through temporary emergencies and enabling their continued irresponsible behavior." But Marcus's final response confirmed that this confrontation would not lead to reconciliation or renewed relationship based on mutual respect and authentic values. "Fine, Mom. If that's the way you want to play this, then we'll explore every legal option available to us," he said, his voice carrying the same cold calculation I had heard from financial criminals throughout my career. "If you want to hoard wealth while your own son struggles, If you want to choose money over family, then you'll face the consequences of those choices. This threat, that he would pursue legal challenges to my competency and autonomy despite having been presented with comprehensive evidence that such challenges were both fraudulent and doomed to failure, represented the final boundary crossing that made my next steps inevitable. "Marcus, before you leave, there's one more thing you need to understand," I said, producing the final component of our presentation. A comprehensive legal analysis prepared by James Morrison that detailed the criminal and civil penalties associated with the various forms of elder abuse and financial fraud that Marcus and Jennifer had attempted. Attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person is a felony in California, punishable by up to 4 years in prison and full restitution of any financial losses, James had written in his legal summary. Systematic harassment designed to coerce financial decisions carries additional penalties, and fraudulent misrepresentation of an elderly person's mental state to justify guardianship proceedings can result in both criminal prosecution and civil liability for damages. Every conversation you've had about having me declared incompetent, every consultation with attorneys about overriding my decision-making, every financial projection based on assumptions about accessing my assets, all of it constitutes evidence of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, I continued, watching Marcus and Jennifer's expressions as they realized the legal jeopardy their actions had created. "But because you're my family, because I still remember the son I raised before he became someone capable of telling his mother to die, I'm offering you a choice," I concluded. "You can acknowledge what you've attempted, accept responsibility for your behavior, seek professional help for your financial situation through legitimate means, and commit to rebuilding our relationship based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Or you can continue down this path, pursue legal challenges that will fail completely while exposing your fraudulent behavior to public scrutiny, and face the criminal and civil consequences of attempted elder abuse while also losing any possibility of family relationship permanently." Marcus and Jennifer's response to this choice revealed everything I needed to know about who they had become and what our relationship would be going forward. "You're threatening your own son with criminal prosecution because he tried to help. You make better financial decisions?" Marcus said, his voice filled with the kind of righteous indignation that suggested he genuinely believed his own manipulation tactics were motivated by concern for my welfare. "We never tried to hurt you, Mom. We were trying to protect you from making decisions that would leave you vulnerable as you get older," Jennifer added, apparently believing that their documented research into guardianship procedures and misrepresentation of my mental state could be reframed as protective rather than predatory. Their inability to acknowledge reality even when confronted with comprehensive documentation confirmed that they had chosen escalation over accountability, manipulation over authenticity, and continued attempted fraud over family relationship. "Then you've made your choice," I replied, gathering the investigation materials and legal documentation from the coffee table. "Patricia Martinelli will continue monitoring your activities. James Morrison will prepare appropriate legal responses to any challenges you attempt to file, and I will proceed with protecting myself and my assets from further manipulation attempts. You'll also need to understand that our family relationship has now been permanently restructured," I continued, my voice steady despite the heartbreak of recognizing that the son I had loved was truly gone. "I will not tolerate further pressure, manipulation, or threats. Any contact between us going forward will be conducted through attorneys, and any attempt to resume your harassment or manipulation campaign will result in immediate criminal prosecution." As Marcus and Jennifer left my house that evening, carrying their unused brochures for assisted living facilities and their failed confidence in their ability to manipulate me into subsidizing their irresponsible lifestyle, they had no idea that their worst miscalculation wasn't underestimating my financial resources or my professional capabilities. Their worst miscalculation was underestimating the pain a mother feels when she realizes her child has become someone capable of wishing for her death, and the strength that pain can generate when it's channeled through 4 decades of experience in building cases against people who think they can manipulate systems for their personal advantage. Within just 2 weeks, Marcus would discover that his mother's final gift to him wouldn't be the inheritance he had tried to steal early, or the financial bailout he had tried to extort through emotional manipulation. His mother's final gift would be teaching him that actions have consequences, that character matters more than convenience, and that some mistakes are too fundamental to be forgiven or forgotten. The revelation was complete. Now came justice. Marcus and Jennifer's response to my ultimatum came exactly 72 hours later, and it confirmed every assessment Patricia and James had made about their character and their likely trajectory when faced with accountability for their actions. Instead of the phone call I had hoped for, one where my son might acknowledge the magnitude of his mistakes and begin the difficult process of rebuilding trust, I received a certified letter from Blackstone and Associates, a law firm notorious throughout California for taking on hopeless cases involving wealthy families, usually representing the losing side in bitter inheritance disputes or frivolous elder abuse claims. Mrs. Chen, the letter began, we represent Marcus Chen and Jennifer Walsh Chen in matters concerning their serious concerns about your mental health, financial decision-making capacity, and vulnerability to exploitation by unethical advisors who may be influencing your judgment for their own benefit. Reading those words, my own son's signature on legal documents that accused me of mental incompetence and claimed I was being manipulated by the very professionals who had helped me expose his fraudulent behavior, was like experiencing his cruel hospital words all over again, but with the added sting of legal formality and calculated strategy. The letter continued with allegations that were as comprehensive as they were false. Claims that my sudden paranoia about family members indicated cognitive decline, that my irrational resistance to reasonable suggestions about my living situation demonstrated impaired judgment, and that my recent association with private investigators and aggressive attorneys suggested I was being manipulated by unscrupulous professionals who were exploiting my confusion for their own financial gain. Our clients are prepared to petition the court for emergency conservatorship proceedings to protect you from continued exploitation and to ensure that your financial affairs are managed in your best interest by family members who have your welfare as their primary concern, the letter concluded, giving me 14 days to voluntarily agree to appropriate supervision of your financial affairs before they would file formal legal challenges to my competency. I read the letter twice, then called James Morrison immediately. They're actually doing it, I told him. My voice steady despite the emotional impact of seeing my son's threats formalized into legal action. Marcus is attempting to have me declared incompetent, just as Patricia's investigation predicted. Margaret, I need you to understand something important, James replied, his tone carrying the calm confidence I remembered from our most challenging cases during my forensic accounting career. This petition is going to fail spectacularly, and, when it does, Marcus and Jennifer will face consequences they clearly haven't anticipated. Are you prepared for this to become a public legal battle that will expose everything about their behavior and their motivations? James, my son told me to die because I wouldn't give him money to subsidize his irresponsible spending, I replied. He's now trying to have me legally declared incompetent to gain access to assets he tried and failed to steal through emotional manipulation. I'm not worried about public exposure. I'm worried about what this process is going to do to whatever remains of our family. Over the following week, James worked with Patricia to prepare what he called the most comprehensive competency defense in California legal history. Every aspect of my mental, physical, and financial capabilities would be documented with such thoroughness that Marcus and Jennifer's petition would not only fail, but would expose them to criminal prosecution for filing fraudulent legal documents. We're going to make this case a textbook example of why adult children can't simply claim their parents are incompetent when those parents make financial decisions the children don't like, James explained as we reviewed our legal strategy. By the time we're finished, Every elder law attorney in California will be using this case to show their clients what happens when you attempt financial elder abuse through the court system. The competency hearing was scheduled for March 15th, exactly 1 month after Marcus had screamed, "Just die, I don't care," in my hospital room. As I sat in Judge Patricia Williams's courtroom that morning, watching my son and daughter-in-law take their seats across the aisle with their attorney, I felt the same cold, analytical clarity that had guided me through the most complex fraud investigations of my career. Marcus and Jennifer's attorney, Robert Blackstone, was exactly what I had expected. An expensive suit containing a man who specialized in creating legal theater designed to confuse judges and juries about straightforward situations. His opening statement was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, disguised as legal argument. "Your Honor, we are here today because a loving son and daughter-in-law are deeply concerned about an elderly woman who has fallen under the influence of unscrupulous advisors who are exploiting her confusion and paranoia for their own financial benefit," Blackstone began, his voice carrying practiced sincerity. "Mrs. Chen, once a respected professional with sound judgment, has recently begun exhibiting behavior that demonstrates clear cognitive decline. Irrational suspicion of family members who want to help her, resistance to reasonable suggestions about her safety and security, and financial decisions that put her assets at risk of exploitation by people who do not have her best interests at heart." Blackstone's presentation continued for 20 minutes, painting a picture of me as a confused elderly woman whose sudden paranoia and irrational behavior had made me vulnerable to manipulation by greedy professionals who were encouraging my delusions about my family's motivations for their own profit. The evidence will show that Mrs. Chen's judgment has become so impaired that she has paid thousands of dollars to private investigators to conduct surveillance on her own family members, based on unfounded suspicions that they are trying to harm her, Blackstone continued, apparently believing that my decision to investigate systematic manipulation attempts was evidence of mental illness rather than prudent self-protection. My clients ask this court to protect Mrs. Chen from continued exploitation by appointing responsible family members to supervise her financial affairs and ensure that her assets are managed in her genuine best interest rather than for the benefit of the unethical advisors who have gained inappropriate influence over her decision-making. When Blackstone finished his opening statement, I felt almost sorry for Marcus and Jennifer. They had hired an attorney who was about to be professionally humiliated in ways that would probably end his career, and they had no idea what was coming. James Morrison's opening statement was a masterpiece of controlled devastation. "Your Honor, what we have before us today is not a case of elderly cognitive decline or exploitation by unethical advisors," James began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him one of California's most respected elder law attorneys. "What we have is a textbook case of attempted financial elder abuse, where adult children with serious financial problems have attempted to gain control of their parents' assets through systematic manipulation, emotional coercion, and ultimately, fraudulent legal proceedings when their manipulation campaign failed. The evidence will show that Mrs. Margaret Chen is not only mentally competent, but exceptionally sophisticated in financial matters, with cognitive abilities that exceed those of most people half her age," James continued, producing the first of several bound volumes that contained our comprehensive documentation. Far from being a confused elderly woman vulnerable to exploitation, Mrs. Chen is a retired forensic accountant, with 45 years of experience detecting and prosecuting exactly the kind of financial fraud that her son and daughter-in-law have attempted to perpetrate against her. For the next hour, James methodically presented evidence that destroyed every claim Marcus and Jennifer had made. Professional psychological evaluations that confirmed my cognitive abilities were exceptional for any age group. Financial competency. Assessments that demonstrated my sophisticated understanding of complex investment strategies. Medical evaluations that confirmed my physical and mental health were excellent. But the most devastating component of James's presentation was Patricia's investigation, which he presented with the systematic precision of a prosecutor building a criminal case. Your Honor, the petitioners claim that Mrs. Chen's resistance to their suggestions indicates impaired judgment, James continued, opening Patricia's comprehensive report. The evidence shows that Mrs. Chen's resistance was actually irrational. Response to a systematic campaign of financial manipulation that began over 18 months ago. What followed was the most comprehensive public exposure of Marcus and Jennifer's behavior that I could have imagined. Every recorded conversation where they discussed my death as a solution to their financial problems. Every consultation with attorneys about guardianship procedures. Every misrepresentation of my mental state to justify their planned intervention. Every detail of their desperate financial situation and their approaching bankruptcy. The petitioners claim that Mrs. Chen is being exploited by unethical advisors, James continued, his voice taking on an edge that suggested he was personally offended by the accusations against his professional integrity. The evidence shows that Mrs. Chen hired qualified professionals to investigate behavior by family members that was causing her legitimate concern, and that those investigations revealed systematic attempted fraud that fully justified her defensive measures. By the time James finished presenting our evidence, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had begun as a competency hearing had become a comprehensive exposure of Marcus and Jennifer's attempted elder abuse, documented with such professional thoroughness that dispute was impossible. Judge Williams's questioning of the witnesses made her perspective clear from the beginning. When Dr. Elizabeth Carter testified about my cognitive evaluation, the judge asked detailed questions about the specific tests used and the comparison of my results to both age-appropriate norms and general population standards. Dr. Carter, in your professional opinion, does Mrs. Chen demonstrate any signs of cognitive impairment that would affect her ability to make financial decisions? Judge Williams asked. Absolutely not, Your Honor, Dr. Carter replied. Mrs. Chen's cognitive function is exceptional for any age group. Her memory, analytical reasoning, and problem-solving abilities are significantly above average. I would feel comfortable with her managing complex financial affairs for other people, let alone her own. When Patricia Martinelli testified about her investigation, Judge Williams asked for specific details about Marcus and Jennifer's financial situation and their documented planning around my assets. Ms. Martinelli, what did your investigation reveal about the petitioner's financial condition? The judge asked. Your Honor, Mr. Chen and Ms. Walsh Chen are in severe financial distress, with monthly expenses exceeding their income by approximately $8,000 and total debt exceeding $200,000, Patricia replied. Their housing costs alone consume over 80% of their net income, and they are approximately 6 to 8 months from complete financial collapse without significant external assistance. And what did you discover about their activities? Regarding Mrs. Chen's assets? The evidence shows systematic research into legal procedures for gaining control of elderly relatives' finances, detailed financial projections based on assumptions about inheriting Mrs. Chen's estate, and recorded conversations discussing her death as a solution to their financial problems. Patricia continued, her professional tone making the accusations even more damning. But the most devastating testimony came from James's presentation of Marcus and Jennifer's own recorded statements, played directly into the courtroom record. Hearing my son's actual voice discussing my life expectancy as a factor in his financial planning, listening to Jennifer calculate how much money they could access if they gained control of my assets, experiencing their casual cruelty preserved in digital form, it was almost unbearable, but it was also absolutely conclusive. When Robert Blackstone attempted to cross-examine our witnesses, his questions revealed how completely unprepared he had been for the quality and comprehensiveness of our documentation. His challenges to the professional evaluations fell apart when confronted with specific test results and peer-reviewed assessment methods. His attempts to characterize Patricia's investigation as biased or incomplete crumbled when she produced recordings and documentation that supported every conclusion she had reached. Most tellingly, When Blackstone tried to suggest that Marcus and Jennifer's financial research was motivated by legitimate concern for my welfare, James was ready with recorded conversations that proved exactly the opposite. "Mr. Blackstone, are you seriously arguing that discussing a parent's death as a solution to financial problems represents legitimate concern for that parent's welfare?" James asked during his cross-examination response, his voice carrying the kind of controlled outrage that made clear he considered the entire petition an insult to the court's intelligence. The hearing concluded with Judge Williams asking Marcus and Jennifer to testify directly about their motivations and actions. What followed was the most painful hour of my life, as I watched my son attempt to justify the unjustifiable while revealing the complete absence of remorse or recognition of wrongdoing. "Mr. Chen, did you tell your mother to just die during a conversation at the hospital?" Judge Williams asked, referring to Patricia's documentation of our confrontation. "Your Honor, my mother was being unreasonable about her living situation, and I was frustrated by her refusal to consider options that would provide better safety and security," Marcus replied, apparently believing that frustration justified telling his mother he wished she would die. "Were you and your wife researching legal procedures for gaining control of your mother's financial affairs?" "We were researching options for protecting my mother from making decisions that could leave her vulnerable as she gets older," Marcus continued, somehow managing to characterize their systematic manipulation campaign as protective rather than predatory. Judge Williams's final questions revealed her complete understanding of what she was actually dealing with. "Mr. Chen, your mother has assets worth approximately $4.8 million, managed with exceptional competence over decades of careful planning," the judge stated. "You and your wife have accumulated over $200,000 in debt through lifestyle choices that exceed your income by $8,000 monthly. Can you explain how gaining control of your mother's assets would improve her welfare rather than solving your financial problems?" The silence that followed that question was absolute. Marcus had no answer because there was no answer. His entire petition was based on financial desperation disguised as concern for my welfare, and Judge Williams had just exposed the reality that everyone in the courtroom could see clearly. Judge Williams's ruling was delivered with the kind of controlled anger that suggested she was personally offended by the waste of court resources and the attempted manipulation of legal processes designed to protect vulnerable elderly people from actual abuse. "This petition is denied in its entirety, with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying absolute finality. "The evidence presented demonstrates conclusively that Mrs. Margaret Chen is exceptionally competent to manage her own affairs, with cognitive abilities and financial sophistication that exceed those of most people in any age group. Furthermore, the evidence demonstrates that this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Chen's welfare, but as part of a systematic campaign to gain control of her assets for the financial benefit of the petitioners, who are experiencing severe financial distress due to their own irresponsible spending decisions." Judge Williams continued with language that was as devastating as it was final. "The court finds that the petitioners have engaged in systematic harassment and attempted financial exploitation of an elderly family member, have misrepresented material facts in their legal filings, and have wasted court resources by filing a petition that was fraudulent in its basic premises. Mrs. Chen is hereby granted a permanent restraining order prohibiting any further contact or communication from the petitioners except through legal counsel, and prohibiting any further attempts to interfere with her financial affairs or personal autonomy." But Judge Williams wasn't finished. "The court is also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to attempted elder abuse, filing false legal documents, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud." Finally, the court is awarding Mrs. Chen attorney's fees and investigation costs in the amount of $47,500 to be paid by the petitioners within 30 days. As Judge Williams's gavel fell, ending the hearing and Marcus and Jennifer's legal challenge permanently, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death. Complete peace about the future and absolute confidence that I had made the right decisions under impossible circumstances. Marcus and Jennifer left the courtroom that day facing criminal investigation, financial penalties they couldn't afford, and the complete destruction of their reputation in the legal and professional communities where they worked. Their attempt to steal my assets had not only failed catastrophically, but had exposed them to consequences far worse than the financial problems they had been trying to solve. But more importantly for my own peace of mind, I had conclusively demonstrated that the son who told me to die, the daughter-in-law who researched how to have me declared incompetent, and the couple who had systematically planned to steal my life's work had chosen their path deliberately and would face the natural consequences of their choices. 6 months later, as I write this final chapter of our family's story, the consequences of Marcus and Jennifer's choices have played out exactly as James and Patricia predicted they would. The criminal investigation resulted in felony charges for attempted elder abuse and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Marcus and Jennifer ultimately accepted a plea agreement that required them to serve 6 months in county jail, complete 3 years of supervised probation, attend mandatory counseling for financial and family relationship issues, and pay full restitution for the legal costs their fraudulent petition had generated. More significantly for their future, both of them lost their professional positions when their employers learned about the criminal charges. Marcus was terminated from his technology company when his security clearance was revoked due to his fraud conviction. Jennifer lost her marketing position when her employer determined that her criminal record created liability issues for a company that handled confidential client information. Their house in Palo Alto went into foreclosure 4 months after the court hearing, when they could no longer make mortgage payments without their professional incomes. The financial collapse they had tried to prevent by stealing my assets occurred anyway, but now they faced it with criminal records, damaged professional reputations, and no family relationships to provide support during their crisis. I wish I could say that watching my son face the consequences of his choices gave me satisfaction, but the truth is that it brought only sadness for the waste of potential and the destruction of relationships that could have been sources of strength and joy for all of us. But alongside that sadness is something more valuable: the recognition that I made the right choice when I refused to enable their destructive behavior by subsidizing their irresponsible lifestyle or accepting their systematic manipulation and abuse. The house on Sycamore Street remains my home, but it has been transformed from the quiet refuge it became after David's death into something that honors both his memory and the values we shared throughout our marriage. I've established the David and Margaret Chen Foundation for Financial Literacy and Elder Protection, using a portion of my assets to provide education and support for elderly people facing financial manipulation by family members. The foundation offers free workshops on recognizing elder abuse, provides legal support for elderly people dealing with family financial conflicts, and maintains a resource center where people can access professional guidance for protecting their assets and autonomy as they age. What happened to your family? Shouldn't happen to anyone, Sarah Martinez, the foundation's director, told me during our quarterly board meeting last month. The education and support services we're providing are helping dozens of families avoid the kind of destructive conflicts that tore your family apart. The work is deeply meaningful because it transforms my personal experience with family betrayal into something that helps others avoid similar pain. Every elderly person we help protect from financial manipulation, every family we help resolve conflicts before they become destructive, every case of potential elder abuse we help expose and prosecute, all of it represents the positive legacy that can emerge from even the most painful personal experiences. I've also begun teaching financial literacy courses at the local community college, sharing the knowledge and experience that helped me build financial security over 5 decades. The students are a mix of young couples beginning their financial journey and older adults who want to better understand how to protect their assets as they age. Mrs. Chen, can you explain how you knew your son was trying to manipulate you? asked Maria Rodriguez, a 68-year-old widow whose own adult children had begun pressuring her to sell her house and move to a senior community. I'm getting the same kind of pressure from my family, and I don't know whether they're genuinely concerned or whether they have other motivations. These conversations, helping other people recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation and teaching them to trust their own judgment when family members' behavior doesn't feel right, are perhaps the most valuable outcome of my experience with Marcus and Jennifer. The key is to remember that people who genuinely care about your welfare will respect your autonomy and support your decisions even when they disagree with them. I explained to Maria and the other students. People who are trying to manipulate you will escalate pressure when you resist, will misrepresent your mental state to justify overriding your decisions, and will frame their demands as being for your own good while actually serving their interests. For Marcus and Jennifer, our relationship remains permanently severed, exactly as Judge Williams ordered and exactly as their choices made inevitable. I receive annual updates from their parole officers confirming they are complying with the terms of their sentences, but we have had no direct contact since the court hearing. I learned through mutual acquaintances that they have moved to Nevada, where Marcus found work in computer support for a small business, and Jennifer works in administrative support for a nonprofit organization. Their combined income is less than a third of what they were earning before their criminal convictions, and they live in a modest apartment while slowly paying off the debts they accumulated during their years of irresponsible spending. Part of me wonders whether the experience of losing everything they thought they wanted, the expensive house, the prestigious careers, the social status that came from appearing financially successful, has taught them anything about the values David and I tried to instill during Marcus's childhood. But a larger part of me recognizes that some choices are irreversible, that some damage to relationships is permanent, and that some lessons come too late to restore what was destroyed in the learning process. Marcus made the choice to tell his mother to die rather than accepting responsibility for his own financial decisions. Jennifer made the choice to research legal procedures for stealing an elderly woman's assets rather than addressing their spending problems through reduced expenses and realistic budgeting. Together, they made the choice to pursue fraudulent legal proceedings rather than accepting accountability for their manipulative behavior. Those choices revealed character flaws that went far beyond financial irresponsibility or family conflict. They revealed a willingness to destroy relationships for monetary gain, to cause emotional cruelty to achieve financial advantage, and to manipulate legal systems designed to protect vulnerable people in order to steal assets they had no right to claim. The son who told me to die is not the child I raised or the man I thought I knew. The relationship I thought we had was destroyed not by my refusal to subsidize his lifestyle, but by his decision to treat me as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a mother to be respected. But in the space left by that destroyed relationship, I found something that honors David's memory and creates positive impact that extends far beyond our family. The opportunity to use my experience and resources to help other people avoid the pain we experienced and to protect vulnerable elderly people from the kind of systematic manipulation that Marcus and Jennifer attempted against me. On quiet evenings, when I sit in David's chair in our living room, surrounded by the Foundation's work and the evidence of lives we're helping improve, I feel his presence not as loss but as continuation of the values we shared and the positive impact we can have when we choose to build rather than to take, to protect rather than to exploit, to create security for others rather than extracting it for ourselves. The woman who refused to die when her son wished she would has instead chosen to live fully, purposefully, and in service of others who face similar challenges. The assets Marcus tried to steal are now creating scholarships for first-generation college students, providing legal support for elderly people facing family financial conflicts, and funding research into effective prevention of elder abuse. In the end, Marcus got exactly what he asked for in my hospital room that day. He told me to just die and get out of his way. I did die. The vulnerable, trusting mother who had always put her son's needs ahead of her own died in that moment, replaced by someone who understood that love without boundaries becomes enabling, that family relationships without mutual respect become manipulation, and that protecting yourself from abuse isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating the space to help others avoid similar pain. The son who wished for my death gave me the gift of clarity about what our relationship had actually become, and the strength to transform that painful truth into something that serves others who face similar challenges. And in this house on Sycamore Street, surrounded by the work that honors David's memory and serves the values we always shared, I am more fully alive than I have been since he died. Not despite the pain Marcus caused, but because of my choice to transform that pain into purpose, that betrayal into protection for others, and that family destruction into community healing. The story that began with, "Just die, I don't care," has become a story about choosing life, choosing service, and choosing to create positive impact that will outlast any individual relationship or personal pain. That, in the end, is the greatest victory of all. 3 years have passed since Judge Williams delivered her devastating ruling against Marcus and Jennifer, and as I sit in my garden on this warm September morning, tending to the roses David planted for our 20th anniversary, I'm struck by how completely my life has transformed from the dark months when my son told me to die. The David and Margaret Chen Foundation has grown beyond anything I could have imagined when I first conceived it as a way to transform my personal pain into community service. What began as a small resource center in my converted dining room has evolved into a comprehensive organization that operates throughout California, providing education, legal support, and advocacy for elderly people facing financial manipulation by family members. Mrs. Chen, we've just received confirmation that the state legislature is considering the Chen Elder Protection Act, announced Dr. Sarah Martinez, our foundation's executive director, as she joined me for our monthly planning meeting in the Yawao Garden. Your case has become the template for strengthening legal protections against family financial abuse. The proposed legislation, named in honor of my experience with Marcus and Jennifer, would require mandatory reporting of suspected elder financial abuse by legal professionals, establish clearer standards for emergency conservatorship proceedings, and create stronger penalties for adult children who attempt to manipulate elderly parents through fraudulent legal claims. It's gratifying to know that what happened to our family might prevent other families from experiencing similar destruction, I replied, though the satisfaction comes with the ongoing sadness of knowing that legislative change emerged from such personal devastation. The foundation now employs 12 full-time staff members and operates 3 regional offices that provide services to elderly people throughout Central and Southern California. Our financial literacy workshops have reached over 2,000 seniors. Our legal support program has helped resolve 127 cases of suspected elder abuse, and our educational materials are now used by social services agencies in 15 states. But perhaps, most meaningfully, we've helped prevent family financial conflicts from escalating to the point of permanent relationship destruction in dozens of cases where early intervention made reconciliation possible. The Rodriguez family situation was resolved yesterday, Sarah continued, updating me on one of our recent cases. After 3 months of family mediation and financial counseling, the adult children acknowledged that their pressure on their mother to sell her house was inappropriate, and they've agreed to respect her autonomy while finding legitimate solutions to their own financial challenges. These success stories, families that stepped back from destructive patterns before crossing the lines that Marcus and Jennifer had crossed, represent what I consider the foundation's most important work. Prevention is always more valuable than prosecution. Healing is always preferable to justice. And keeping families together through mutual respect is always better than protecting individuals through permanent separation. The personal satisfaction I derive from this work has helped fill the space left by my severed relationship with Marcus. Though it has never completely replaced the grief I continue to feel for the son I lost to his own choices and the grandchildren I will never know because of the boundaries his behavior made necessary. 2 months ago, I received an unexpected letter that reopened questions I thought had been permanently resolved. The envelope arrived without a return address, postmarked from Las Vegas, Nevada, and contained a handwritten note that I recognized immediately as Marcus's distinctive penmanship. "Mom," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, and I know that this letter probably violates the court order that prohibits communication between us. But there are things I need to say that I should have said 3 years ago, and I can't move forward with my life without at least trying to find some way to acknowledge the truth about what I did to you and our family." Reading my son's words, for the first time since the court hearing, brought back the complex mixture of love, grief, and protective wariness that had defined my feelings about him since his cruel outburst in the hospital. Part of me wanted to tear up the letter without reading further, maintaining the emotional distance that had provided peace and stability. But a larger part of me needed to understand whether the man who had wished for my death had experienced any genuine recognition of what he had destroyed. I've spent the last 3 years in counseling, trying to understand how I became someone capable of telling my mother to die, someone who could plan to steal from the person who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities she never had. Marcus continued, "I've learned things about myself that are difficult to accept, but that I need to acknowledge if I'm ever going to become the person you and Dad tried to raise me to be." The letter continued for 4 pages, detailing Marcus's psychological journey through the aftermath of our legal battle, his gradual recognition of how his values had been corrupted by financial pressure and social expectations, and his understanding of the systematic nature of the manipulation he and Jennifer had attempted against me. "I realize now that when I told you to die, I was actually expressing my own self-hatred for the financial mess I had created, projected onto you because accepting responsibility for my own choices was more painful than blaming you for not rescuing me from the consequences of those choices," he wrote with a clarity that suggested genuine psychological work rather than superficial regret. "I understand now that everything Jennifer and I did, the pressure campaign, the research into guardianship procedures, the fraudulent competency petition, was systematic elder abuse, and that the only reason it failed was because you were stronger, smarter, and more prepared than we ever imagined. We weren't trying to help you. We were trying to steal from you. And the fact that we convinced ourselves our motives were protective doesn't change the reality of what we attempted." Reading these words, my son's acknowledgement of truths I had spent 3 years hoping he might eventually recognize, created a complicated emotional response that I hadn't anticipated. Relief that he had finally understood the magnitude of his actions. Grief for the time and relationship that his choices had cost us. And uncertainty about what, if anything, this recognition might mean for our future. The letter's conclusion was perhaps the most difficult part to read, because it demonstrated that Marcus now understood not just what he had done, but what it had cost both of us permanently. "I know that saying I'm sorry can never undo the pain I caused or repair the trust I destroyed. I know that you've built a meaningful life without me, and that you've used your experience with my betrayal to help other families avoid similar pain. I know that I have no claim on your forgiveness and no right to expect reconciliation after what I put you through. But I want you to know that the person who told you to die is gone. That person was destroyed by the consequences of his own actions. And in his place is someone who understands that love requires respect, that family relationships require mutual dignity, and that financial desperation never justifies emotional cruelty or systematic manipulation. I don't know if there's any path back to having a relationship with you, and I understand that there may not be. But I needed you to know that everything you tried to teach me about character, responsibility, and treating others with dignity, all the lessons I rejected when they conflicted with what I thought I wanted, have finally taken root. It took losing everything, including you, for me to understand their value. The letter concluded with information that explained why Marcus had chosen to reach out after 3 years of court-ordered silence. Jennifer and I divorced 18 months ago. The financial pressure and criminal consequences of our actions destroyed whatever genuine affection we might have had for each other, and we both recognized that our relationship had been built more on shared entitlement than authentic partnership. She moved to Arizona to start over completely, and I stayed in Nevada to continue the counseling and community service that are part of my probation requirements. I'm writing to you now because my probation ends next month, and I wanted to reach out while I still had the structure and support of court-supervised rehabilitation. My counselor, Dr. Patricia Henderson, suggested that acknowledging the full truth of what I did to you might be important for my continued recovery, even if it doesn't lead to renewed relationship. I'm also writing because I learned about the foundation you established and the legislative changes that resulted from our case. Knowing that your experience with my betrayal has helped protect other elderly people from similar abuse has given me the first genuine peace I've felt since that day in the hospital when I became someone I didn't recognize. After reading Marcus's letter 3 times, I spent 2 weeks considering how to respond, if at all. The court order that prohibited contact between us had expired with his probation, so communication was legally permissible. But the more important question was whether any form of renewed relationship would be emotionally wise or practically beneficial for either of us. I consulted with Dr. Rebecca Foster, the geriatric psychiatrist who had evaluated my competency during the court proceedings and who had since become both a professional colleague through the Foundation's work and a personal friend who understood the complexity of my situation with Marcus. Margaret, the letter suggests genuine psychological growth and authentic recognition of responsibility, Dr. Foster told me during one of our conversations. That's significant and shouldn't be dismissed, but the question isn't whether Marcus has changed. The question is whether you want to create space in your life for testing, whether that change is sustainable, and whether it could form the foundation for some form of renewed relationship. I need to understand something first, I replied. Is it possible for someone to completely transform their character and values, or do people ultimately revert to their fundamental nature when faced with new pressures? Dr. Foster's response was both honest and nuanced. People can change profoundly, especially when they've experienced significant consequences for destructive behavior and when they've committed to sustained psychological work. But change requires ongoing effort and conscious choice. The person Marcus has become through counseling and consequence will only persist if he continues making the daily choices that support that transformation. More importantly for your situation, even if Marcus has genuinely changed, that doesn't obligate you to provide him with opportunities to demonstrate that change through renewed relationship. You have the right to protect the peace and stability you've built, regardless of his psychological growth. After extensive consideration and consultation with the people I trusted most, I decided to respond to Marcus's letter with carefully defined boundaries that would allow for limited contact while protecting the life I had rebuilt. My response was brief but clear. Marcus, I received your letter and appreciate the recognition of responsibility it represents. The psychological work you've done and the understanding you've developed suggest genuine growth that I hope will continue to serve you well. I'm willing to consider very limited contact that would allow us to explore whether some form of relationship might be possible in the future. However, this would need to occur within strict boundaries designed to protect the stability and peace I've built over the past 3 years. If you're genuinely interested in this possibility, you can contact Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Foundation to arrange a single meeting in a neutral location with a counselor present. This meeting would be an opportunity for us to assess whether further contact would be beneficial for both of us. I want you to understand clearly that this willingness to consider limited contact doesn't represent forgiveness for what you did, doesn't obligate me to rebuild a relationship that your choices destroyed, and doesn't change the fact that your actions had consequences that will affect both of us permanently. What it represents is recognition that people can change, acknowledgement of the psychological work you've apparently done, and willingness to explore whether the person you've become is someone I could know without compromising my own well-being. 3. Weeks later, Marcus, Dr. Martinez, a family counselor named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Marcus's ex-wife, and I met in a conference room at the Foundation's main office. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours, with the understanding that either Marcus or I could end it at any time if the conversation became counterproductive or emotionally harmful. Seeing my son for the first time in 3 years was more difficult than I had anticipated. He looked older, obviously, but also different in ways that suggested his experiences had changed him fundamentally. The aggressive confidence and entitled bearing that had characterized his behavior during our family conflict had been replaced by something that seemed like genuine humility and cautious hope. "Mom, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Marcus began, his voice carrying none of the manipulative charm I remembered from his previous attempts to pressure me into financial decisions. "I know this is difficult for you, and I appreciate that you're willing to consider any form of renewed contact after what I put you through." For the next hour and 45 minutes, we engaged in the most honest conversation Marcus and I had ever had. He spoke about his psychological journey with specificity and insight that suggested genuine therapeutic work rather than superficial regret. He acknowledged not just the actions he had taken, but the character flaws that had made those actions possible. "I spent my adult life measuring success by external markers, income, possessions, social status, rather than by the internal values you and Dad tried to teach me," Marcus explained. "When those external markers became threatened by my own poor financial decisions, I was willing to sacrifice everything that actually mattered: integrity, family relationships, basic human decency, to protect symbols that were ultimately meaningless." More importantly, Marcus demonstrated understanding of the systematic nature of his manipulation and the broader implications of what he had attempted. "What Jennifer and I did to you wasn't a family conflict or a disagreement about financial priorities," he continued. "It was elder abuse. We researched legal procedures for overriding your autonomy. We misrepresented your mental state to justify our actions. We recorded your conversations without consent. And we ultimately tried to use the court system to steal assets we had no right to claim. That's criminal behavior, and the fact that we convinced ourselves our motives were protective doesn't change the reality of what we attempted." But the most significant aspect of our conversation was Marcus's understanding of the permanent consequences his choices had created, both for our relationship and for his own life trajectory. "I understand that even if you decide to allow some form of renewed contact, our relationship can never be what it was before," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious emotional weight of these words. "The trust I destroyed can't be fully rebuilt. The pain I caused can't be erased, and the time we lost can't be recovered. I have to live with those consequences for the rest of my life. But I also understand that the person who told you to die needed to be destroyed for me to become someone capable of genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. The consequences of my actions, losing my career, my marriage, my financial security, and most importantly, my relationship with you, were necessary for me to recognize how completely I had abandoned the values that actually matter." Dr. Walsh facilitated our conversation with skill that kept us focused on productive topics, while preventing either of us from becoming overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of addressing 3 years of separation and the profound betrayal that had caused it. At the end of our meeting, I had a clear sense that Marcus had indeed undergone significant psychological change, and that his recognition of responsibility was genuine rather than strategic. But I also understood that any decision about renewed relationship needed to be made carefully, with realistic expectations and appropriate boundaries. "I'm willing to consider ongoing contact, but it needs to happen gradually and within clear limits," I told Marcus as our meeting concluded. I need to see evidence over time that the changes you've described are sustainable and that you can maintain appropriate boundaries without reverting to manipulative behavior when faced with stress or disappointment. I also need you to understand that my life is full and meaningful without you in it, and that any renewed relationship needs to add value to both our lives rather than creating obligation or emotional burden. I'm not willing to compromise the peace and stability I've built, regardless of how much you've changed. Marcus's response demonstrated the humility and realistic expectations that suggested his psychological growth was authentic. I understand, completely, and I'm grateful for any opportunity to demonstrate that I've learned from my mistakes, he replied. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect our relationship to return to what it was, and I don't expect you to prioritize rebuilding our connection over protecting your own well-being. If you're willing to allow occasional contact while maintaining appropriate boundaries, that's more than I deserve and more than I hoped for. Over the past 6 months, Marcus and I have maintained limited contact through monthly phone calls and quarterly meetings at the foundation, always with Dr. Martinez or Dr. Walsh present to provide structure and professional perspective. These interactions have allowed me to observe Marcus's continued psychological growth, while maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect my own emotional stability. The relationship we're building bears no resemblance to the parent-child dynamic we had before his betrayal. Instead, it's something more like a careful friendship between two adults who share a complicated history and are exploring whether they can create something positive from the ruins of what was destroyed. Marcus has begun volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provides financial counseling to people facing bankruptcy, using his experience with financial disaster to help others avoid similar mistakes. He's also completing a degree in social work through an online program, with the goal of eventually working in elder services or family counseling. I want to spend the rest of my life helping people avoid the mistakes I made, he told me during our most recent conversation. I can't undo the harm I caused to you and our family, but I can use my experience to help other families address financial pressure before it destroys their relationships. This commitment to service as a form of redemption resonates with my own decision to transform personal pain into community benefit through the Foundation's work. While I remain cautious about the sustainability of Marcus's transformation, I'm encouraged by evidence that he's choosing to use his experience constructively, rather than simply trying to return to the life he lost. As for Jennifer, I've learned through Marcus that she moved to Phoenix, where she works as an administrative coordinator for a community health center and lives quietly with minimal social media presence or public engagement. According to Marcus, she has never expressed interest in accepting responsibility for her role in their systematic manipulation campaign or in making amends for the harm she helped cause. Jennifer still believes that our actions were justified by our financial situation and your unwillingness to help us, Marcus reported during one of our conversations. She sees herself as a victim of circumstances, rather than recognizing that our financial problems were self-created and that pressuring you was inexcusable regardless of our situation. This difference in their post-conviction trajectories, Marcus accepting full responsibility and seeking to make amends through service, Jennifer maintaining victim status and avoiding accountability, suggests that people respond differently to consequences and that genuine character change requires more than simply facing penalties for destructive behavior. Today, as I conclude this final chapter of our family's story, I'm sitting in the garden David and I created together, surrounded by evidence of the meaningful life that emerged from the ashes of Marcus's betrayal. The Foundation's work continues to expand, helping more families each year avoid the pain we experienced. The legislation bearing my name has been signed into law, providing stronger protection for elderly people facing family financial manipulation. And my relationship with Marcus, while forever changed by his choices, has evolved into something that honors both accountability and the possibility of redemption. The roses David planted for our anniversary are blooming magnificently this September, their fragrance carrying memories of the love we shared and the values we tried to instill in our son. Some of those values were temporarily lost, but have been recovered through consequence and conscious choice. Others were permanently damaged by actions that can't be undone. But in this garden, in this work, in this carefully reconstructed life, I feel David's presence not as loss, but as continuation of the legacy we built together. The understanding that love requires boundaries, that family relationships must be based on mutual respect, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is allowing them to face the full consequences of their choices. The son who told me to die gave me the opportunity to discover strength I didn't know I possessed, to build something meaningful from profound pain, and to help others avoid the destruction that comes when financial pressure corrupts family relationships beyond repair. In the end, Marcus got exactly what he asked for in that hospital room. The vulnerable, trusting mother who had always prioritized his needs over her own boundaries died in that moment, replaced by someone who understood that sustainable love requires mutual respect, that family loyalty must be reciprocal, and that protecting yourself from abuse isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating the space to serve others who face similar challenges. The woman who refused to die when her son wished she would has instead chosen to live fully, purposefully, and in service of values that honor both accountability and redemption. The assets Marcus tried to steal are now protecting other elderly people from family financial abuse, supporting research into prevention strategies, and creating educational resources that help families address financial pressure before it destroys their relationships. And in this house on Sycamore Street, surrounded by David's roses and the evidence of a life rebuilt from betrayal into service, I am more completely alive than I ever thought possible, not despite the pain Marcus caused, but because of my choice to transform that pain into protection for others, that family destruction into community healing, and that cruel rejection into renewed purpose. The story that began with, "Just die, I don't care," has become a story about choosing life, choosing service, choosing forgiveness without forgetting, and choosing to create positive impact that will outlast any individual relationship or personal pain. That transformation, from victim to victor to servant, represents not just survival but triumph, not just recovery but renewal, not just justice but the kind of redemptive grace that honors both accountability and the possibility that people can change when consequences teach them lessons that compassion alone could not provide. In the end, that is the greatest victory of all. Not just that I survived my son's betrayal, but that I transformed it into something that serves others, honors the values David and I shared, and creates positive impact that will continue long after this story ends and all of us have become memory. This is how love endures, not by avoiding all pain, but by transforming necessary pain into purposeful service, not by forgetting betrayal, but by using it to protect others from similar harm, not by pretending that actions don't have consequences, but by ensuring that those consequences serve justice, growth, and the protection of the vulnerable. And in my garden each morning, as I tend the roses David planted and review the foundation's work that protects other families from the pain we experienced, I feel his presence in every choice to build rather than destroy, to serve rather than take, to create security for others rather than extract it for myself. The woman who was told to die chose instead to live, fully, purposefully, and in service, of love that is strong enough to require accountability, wise enough to maintain boundaries, and generous enough to transform personal pain into community healing. That is the legacy David and I built together, that Marcus's betrayal ultimately strengthened rather than destroyed, and that will continue serving others long after all of us have joined David in whatever comes next. In this garden, in this work, in this life, rebuilt from the ashes of family, destruction, I am finally, completely, and permanently home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.